And after weeks of waiting, Coach, Big Ten bowl season is here, and we could not have come any faster.
It seems like it's here from morning to night, right? I mean, all you got to do is put the TV on and someone's finishing a game or getting ready for a game. The one last night with Wisconsin, that kept us up a little bit, but it was a great football game. It really was. It turned out to be exciting and interesting to look at for a lot of different ways.
As a player and former coach, the waiting period, how is that when you haven't played football in nearly a month and now you got to get cranked up and play in the biggest game of the season?
Yeah, it's challenging, particularly when you're not, I think if you're playing for the championship game, it might be a little easier to keep the players kind of focused. But in Wisconsin's standpoint, I mean, this was a real challenge. I mean, for Bobby Ingram, the offensive coordinator, for Jim Leonard, the defensive coordinator, you're not going to be there, part of the staff, but yet these are kids that you recruited. I mean, these are kids that you've been with for 2, 3, 4 years. And you want them to benefit from a good experience and winning the football game. But yet you're going to have a new head coach. I mean, there are a lot of moving parts in this situation, and they got it done. So hats off to the coaches that were there and stuck with it. Hats off to those players, the fans. I mean, it really was a great win to wrap up the season for a tough year with Wisconsin football.
Yes, it sure was. A lot of turnover. Let's get to the big story, and that is the Big Ten is now 1-0 in bowl games this season after Wisconsin beat Oklahoma State in the Guaranteed Rate Bowl Tuesday night 24-17 in the desert. Braylon Allen ran for 116 yards and 1 touchdown in the win. Wisconsin's Cedric Dort sealed the win with an interception. With 3 minutes to go, new head coach Luke Fickell was with the team on the sideline while Jim Leonard coached. And let's start there. That seemed pretty weird. And you're 40 years in football. Have you ever seen an incoming coach on the sideline with the headset on, basically coaching a team that he hasn't been with all year?
No, I wonder if Luke had the headset turned on, you know what I mean? or if this was just I'm going to be visible. But I'm sure that there had to be a good understanding. And Luke's a good guy, and so Bobby and Jimmy Leonard. I'm sure there was an understanding of this is how. Let's handle it this way, guys. You make the calls, Bobby on offense, Jim on defense. But it would be, now it's 4th and 1. And Luke's thinking, I want to run the ball, and Bobby's thinking, I want to throw the ball. I mean, that could be a little bit uncomfortable. But I'll tell you what, I could see the positive side of Luke wanting to do this is he got a chance to see the players practice. He got a chance to see these guys in meetings, their preparation. And let's not lose sight that Wisconsin football, Barry Alvarez, Paul Christ, Brett Bielema, I mean, this is a great winning university, a great winning program, as good as any of them, really. I mean, and so I think Luke, even though he was at Ohio State, there's nothing like being there live and saying and learning. You know what I mean? Okay, what have these guys done? And he'll make changes, to all phases of it, probably to some degree. But I just think that from a exposure standpoint, from him to see it live during the preparation and then on the sideline, I think there's merit to that. I could see why he would want to do that, plus the visibility.
Yes, but when you look at this 2022 season and just putting a bow on this season with that win at the Guaranteed Rate Bowl, now let's look ahead at this Luke Fickell era that's going to take place in Madison. The landscape looks wide open for him, especially being in Cincinnati, recruiting Ohio players, Pennsylvania players, and now you're in Madison where, as you mentioned, they've built a rich culture in their football program.
Yeah, that's a good point, Telly. I mean, the recruiting, I think a big advantage for Luke being on the sideline is visibility all over the country. Everybody saw him. Okay, he is now at Wisconsin. And those recruiting ties, obviously, that he had when he was at Ohio State are going to be important because they recruit a little bit different areas and stuff. And now at Cincinnati, boy, he's done a great job there. And they've pushed a little bit further east. They got into Jersey, they got into Pennsylvania. And these areas are all within driving distance, okay? They're all within driving distance of Madison. So I think the recruiting part of it is going to be a big key. And the second thing, when you look at the quarterbacks, Desmond Ridder, the quarterback he had right at Cincinnati, and you look at the traditional quarterbacks that we've had at Wisconsin, Wisconsin has been more of the pro style, run the ball, play action pass, quarterbacks throwing it. But at Cincinnati, I mean, his quarterbacks are athletic. And do they throw it? Absolutely. But it's more of the run-pass option stuff with the quarterback. So I don't know. I don't think defensively there'll be major changes. He's bringing his defensive coordinator with him, Tressel from Cincinnati. And Luke will be involved in that. But offensively could be the biggest area that we see a change in the future philosophy-wise at Wisconsin. I think we're going to see a little bit more of the mobile quarterback, the quarterback read option, which majority of the teams are doing now. That's where I think the change could come.
Now, you just mentioned Fickell with his recruiting and the way he's been able to get NFL guys into his program, not just Desmond Ridder, the quarterback, but you had Sauce Gardner, the cornerback that went high in the draft to the New York Jets. But when you just mentioned the style that Luke wants to bring and the type of quarterback that he wants to bring, what does this mean for a guy like Braylon Allen, who just rushed for 116 yards and a touchdown, had a outstanding freshman year, subpar sophomore season, but now what does that mean for him moving forward?
Oh, I think it's all positive and all good. I mean, because if a team's one-dimensional and they're not a threat at the quarterback run or not threat throwing the ball, and Cincinnati threw the heck out of the ball. I mean, big time. If that takes some pressure off the running game. And the one thing when they interviewed Luke at halftime, I wanted to hear exactly what he said. And what he said was, boy, we are playing Wisconsin football. The big guys up front got to take this challenge on and run the ball. When I heard that, I said, wow, he understands the importance of running the football. So if I'm Braylon Allen, I mean, I'm excited. I mean, this is going to be a guy that everybody in the stadium's not going to know that we're going to hand it off every time. We're going to be a little bit more balanced. And if a team is balanced and they are talented and they are good, that puts the most stress on a defense.
Well, the Luke Fickell era has begun in Madison. Let's switch gears and look ahead to the college football playoff, where the Big Ten will be well represented in both semifinal games. We'll start in Arizona, where the Verbo Fiesta Bowl will take place, with it being TCU and Michigan. They're coming in as favorites this year, unlike last year when they were big-time underdogs against Georgia. How does that change the complexity of how Jim Harbaugh and that Wolverine staff prepare for this year's Fiesta Bowl?
Well, this will be, I think the preparation will be the same. The mindset will be different. Okay, Telly? I mean, as far as what we have to do to get ready, from a practice standpoint, a meeting standpoint, Jim, he knows what he's got to do to get ready. And he proved that last year, too. I think the biggest difference is going to be the mindset and the confidence in their football team. I think they should be a lot more confident team going into this one, and particularly facing TCU. I mean, when you look at this matchup, TCU, other than their third down defense, that's the only category, Telly, that they are ranked like in the top 20. Every other defensive category, they are 20, 30, 40, 50 and up.
Wow.
They haven't been very good. So the temptation in this game, the way I see it, is going to be on offense, for Jim to be patient and run the ball. See if these guys can stop. They're 77th in FBS in stopping the run, talking TCU's defense. Wow. So you got to come out and challenge these guys right off the bat and see if we can run the football, control the game, control the clock, keep our defense rested. I mean, that'll be the first thing that I want to see how that unfolds when this game starts.
Well, Kansas State beat TCU twice in the regular season. Well, once in the conference title game and once during the regular season, and it was because they were able to run the ball, and we'll see if Michigan is able to do that. In the second semifinal game, it'll take place in Atlanta for the Peach Bowl between Georgia and Ohio State. The Buckeyes defense will have their hands full with that Georgia attack, especially led by Heisman finalist Stetson Bennett.
Yep.
But what will the Buckeye defense need to do to keep their offense in this game?
You know, getting to that, I'm looking at these two programs. There can't be two finer programs in all college football right now. You see the recruiting so far. I think one school has 15, I know they do, 15 5-stars,
wow,
and the other one has 14 5-stars. Both of their quarterbacks were Heisman finalists. One's offense is number 2 in the nation. The other one's defense is number 2 in the nation. I mean, there's a lot of similar statistics, okay, matching up these two teams. The one thing that I really like about Ohio State, is good as Georgia's defense is, and they are 1 against the rush, 2, 3, and 1 in red zone defense. But the one area, Telly, that they are very average, and this is hard to believe, is sacks and getting turnovers.
Wow.
I mean, they're in the 70s in sacks in the country. So they are more of a, and it's tough to say when you're talking about one of the best defenses in college football, that they are more of a bend but don't break, but that's kind of how they play. I mean, they're not a big pressure team, a big blitz team, and it shows up with the sacks. So with that, my point is, now all of a sudden, C.J. Stroud, this offense is going to have some opportunities. They should to hold on to the football and not feel the pressure and make some plays down the field. I really want to see that matchup.
And that's hard to believe because Georgia was so great with the pass rush last year. They had all those draft picks, and now they are ranked so low when it comes to that. And we'll have more on all the football action in the bowl season coming up. The bowl season for the Big Ten is off and running after Wisconsin's win over Oklahoma State Tuesday night. Here's a look at the Big Ten College Bowl slate. Thursday, Minnesota will take on Syracuse in the Pinstripe Bowl. Saturday, we have the 2 semifinals with the Fiesta and Peach Bowls. And Monday, it's the granddaddy of them all, the Rose Bowl between number 8 Utah versus number 11 Penn State. As we welcome you back to Big Ten today, Coach Wanstead rejoins me, and I want to welcome in Joshua Perry, who will be heading to Atlanta for the Peach Bowl between Georgia and Ohio State. But of course, we're going to start with the Fiesta Bowl. But before I do that, Joshua, let me ask you, it was one thing to wait weeks to play a game as a player, but as a broadcaster, have you been getting antsy to call something since it's been weeks since you've been at a football game?
Been very antsy. I've been trying to fill in with some NFL. It's not the same. I love college football. So I'm excited to be going to Atlanta, of course, to cover the Ohio State Buckeyes as they face Georgia in the Peach Bowl. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm excited to watch the Fiesta Bowl semifinal as well. This Michigan team looks like they're ready to make a run.
And speaking of that Fiesta Bowl, TCU versus Michigan, and we talked about it earlier in the show, TCU lost twice to Kansas State because Kansas State was able to just run the ball down their throat. So it should be simple. Michigan run the ball, they should win, right?
I think so. And I think that's the game plan they're going to want to get started with. But I think it becomes more difficult to win this football game and really to make a statement that they can win the college football playoff if they don't throw the football the way that we've watched Michigan do it the last 2 times that they played. Against Ohio State, they had all of those explosive passes with J.J. McCarthy really standing in the pocket, taking on pressure and delivering some accurate passes. And then against Purdue, whether it was the young tight end Colston Loveland, whether it's Cornelius Johnson or Ronnie Bell, I mean, we saw all of the talent that Michigan has really come out in that game. So their pass game has really taken a step forward the last 2 times that we saw them. I think it needs to continue to do that. Maybe not to beat TCU because they can beat TCU running the football. But if they want to win a national title, this pass game is going to have to get back in rhythm, and they're going to need to be explosive once again.
Yeah, you know what, Josh, that's a good point. The interesting thing is Michigan, we're all saying run the ball. TCU's defense is average, has been average all year. But here is the issue, and I'm thinking about this from a head coach's perspective. So now Jim's running the football, and it's back and forth, and it's a one-score game. And now you start getting into that fourth quarter. You don't want that if you're Michigan, because when you look at this TCU's offense, right, with their quarterback, who's a finalist, second in the Heisman voting, they got a number one pick at wide receiver. They're balanced. I mean, that offense, their running back has rushed for over 100 yards the last 6 games. So TCU's offense is explosive enough that if you let them hang around, and it gets down there to the last quarter and you're 3 points ahead or 7 points ahead, I mean, this could be a dangerous game. So, going with what Joshua said, Michigan, yes, so they got to run the ball and establish their identity, but they're going to have to make some plays in the passing game to beat this football team.
Should be a very interesting game. Once again, Michigan is favored, unlike they were last year in the semifinal game against Georgia. And speaking of Georgia, they will be in the second semifinal game, and the game that, of course, Joshua, you will be in attendance at, the Peach Bowl between Ohio State and Georgia. And let's start with Ohio State. How do you think they will respond, having played their last game nearly 5 weeks ago and coming off a loss against Michigan?
I mean, they better respond coming out the gate swinging. And this is a really good Georgia football team. We know what kind of talent they have, both offensively and defensively. And Ohio State has the talent that can match them. It's going to be about their mentality. And you're right, they're wounded because of what happened in Columbus against Michigan. And so now they have an opportunity to rewrite the narrative on this football team and to really show people what they actually are. But I think this is fully a mentality game for Ohio State. If they come out and they kind of test the waters and feel their way through the first and second quarter, this could be a little bit ugly because Georgia has that mentality where they can come out. They've been here before and they understand what it takes to win a championship. I think if Ohio State comes out and they want to be the aggressor, now we're talking about a game that becomes really interesting where we get to see the talents of both teams. So for a response, I don't know what it is. There has to be a strong one for Ohio State, or else this is a Georgia team that can go ahead and assert their will early on.
Yeah, I agree with you, Josh. You know, probably a guy that maybe doesn't, even though he was a finalist for the Heisman, Stetson Bennett, the quarterback from Georgia, he's probably the least talked about really good player in the country. For whatever reason, I think it's maybe Georgia's defense or, that takes all the glamour. But this kid, when you look at the percentages of him throwing the football, I mean, Ohio State's defense is going to be stressed. I mean, their offensive line hasn't given up a sack in 6 weeks. Okay, 6 games, Georgia has not given up a sack. So they can block, and they've got 3 running backs that have all rushed for over 500 yards this season. So Georgia's offense is balanced. They got their tight end is probably going to be a first-round draft pick. So I'm kind of looking at this thing from Georgia's offense might be, the hype is the defense. Number 2, and they do this, Georgia's defense. But, Ohio State, I mean, this is going to be, for Coach Knowles and that defense up at Ohio State, they are going to have to show up in a big-time way because this Georgia offense can beat you and score points a lot of different ways.
And you mentioned the quarterback, Stetson Bennett. Let's talk about Ohio State's quarterback, C.J. Stroud, where they will face some top-notch defensive backs in that Bulldog secondary. Now, when you look at the Ohio State wide receivers versus Georgia's defensive backs, how much will C.J. Stroud's legs play a part in this if he's unable to get the receivers to rock, Joshua?
I think that C.J. Stroud is going to be the most important football player in this game for Ohio State, and it's because of what he can do with his legs if he decides to. There are going to be opportunities for Ohio State to throw the football on this Georgia secondary. This is a very good secondary. I don't think that it's a secondary that Ohio State can't get open against. They're going to try to do some things to guard against the talent Ohio State has, specifically Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Egbuka. They like to play 2-man, so they're going to play man-to-man underneath. They're going to keep 2 safeties up high to try to get brackets on the really good wide receivers. So Ohio State's going to have to do a couple of things. Number 1, they're going to have to be more than 2 receiving options that show up. This would be a great game for Cade Stover to get back on track. But number 2, you got to run the football, and I think it's going to have to come from the quarterback position. So not only is C.J. Stroud going to have to be accurate in delivering the football to these wide receivers because he's going to see tight coverage out there from the Georgia secondary. If Reed number 1 isn't there. Reed number 2 isn't there. You might want to think about pulling it down because nobody's expecting him to run. And CJ Stroud, even though he's not a runner, he has talent with his legs. We have seen him make plays when he decides to run the football this year. So to me, the most important player in this game is going to be CJ Stroud because I think he can make a difference if he decides that he wants to pull the football down and run in this game.
Yeah, I made a point earlier, Joshua, that when you look at this Georgia defense, I mean, they're top 5, top 10 in every category in the country except rushing the passer. You know, they're way down the list, bottom half in getting to the quarterback. So I think C.J. Stroud, just what Josh was saying, I mean, he's going to have opportunities. But here's the one statistic that they are very good at, and it's third down defense. You know, so that's when they get after you. So Ohio State, if they end up in 3rd and long, okay, and now it's on C.J. Stroud alone to throw the ball, that's a lot of stress. But if they can be balanced and run a little bit, and maybe he scrambles a little bit, like quarterback run, so we've seen him do, called plays. We saw him do it against Northwestern earlier in the season, like Josh was talking about. All of a sudden, you get down in those third down and makeable situations. Now, advantage Ohio State.
Yes, the college football playoff will be well represented by the Big Ten with a chance of an all Big Ten national championship game.
Wow.
We'll see how things unfold. Last but not least, let's switch over to the Rose Bowl. And this is probably one of the last times we'll see it in this traditional format, a Pac-12 team versus a Big Ten team. But what should we expect, Joshua, when Utah and Penn State hook up in Pasadena?
Well, first off, these are 2 great football teams that I have a ton of respect for, obviously covering Penn State all year long, what they were able to do, winning 10 games. And not a lot of people talked about it the way that I think that they deserve to be talked about. They earned their way out to Pasadena. And this Utah team, for the 2nd year in a row in the Rose Bowl, I think it's awesome. And it's been fun to watch them. But when people think about Utah, they think about, tough offense and running the football and playing tough defense and discipline, assignment sound. This is a very explosive football team, and folks don't talk about them like that. This is a top 10 scoring offense in the country. So Penn State is going to have their hands full. Manny Diaz did a phenomenal job in year 1 as defensive coordinator in Happy Valley. He's going to have a great game plan because this is a Utah offense that if you let them, they will rack up yards, they will rack up points, they will move the football. And this is what I'm excited to see, is that you have 2 teams that I believe have a great offensive coaching staff with some great players, great defensive coaching staffs with some great players, and they can each both throw haymakers. So this is going to be one of those fun games. I'm excited to watch it play out, but let's not sleep on this Utah team as one that's going to go out there and just, try to run the football 3 yards in a cloud of dust. This is an exciting, fun football team, much like Penn State, and this is going to be a great game.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It's going to be as good as any of the playoff games, without a doubt. Hats off to James Franklin and Penn State. I mean, in my mind, they're the most improved team in the country. From where they were at with the young players at the beginning to where they ended up, just an outstanding job by him and all their coaches. Joshua mentioned Manny Diaz. But Utah, I always look at in bowl games, every game, who would you compare this team to? Penn State, who did they play in our – this is Michigan. In my mind, wow. Michigan. And they will throw the ball. They will throw the ball, just what Joshua said. I mean, their quarterback, Cam Rising, he was a big-time recruit. Originally was offered and going to go to Oklahoma with Lincoln Riley. And then things didn't work out. So this is a highly recruited kid that's got talent. But let me tell you something. They are as physical. When you look at Utah's defense, they are number 1 in scoring and rushing and almost every defensive category in the Pac-12. This is a Michigan-looking team to me, and then that's going to be the biggest challenge for Penn State. We're going to have to buckle up and bring our mouthpieces because this is going to be physical on all areas.
Nothing like the bowl season. Joshua, thank you for your time. Safe travels to Atlanta, my friend.
Appreciate it.
The bowl season for the Big Ten is off and running after Wisconsin's win over Oklahoma State Tuesday night. Here's a look at the Big Ten College Bowl slate. Thursday, Minnesota will take on Syracuse in the Pinstripe Bowl. Saturday, we have the 2 semifinals with the Fiesta and Peach Bowls. Monday, it's the granddaddy of them all, the Rose Bowl between number 8 Utah versus number 11 Penn State. Welcome back to Big Ten. Today, I'm pleased to be joined by former two-time Michigan All-American tight end Jake Butt. He's also the Big Ten football analyst who will be on our coverage in Arizona for the Fiesta Bowl. And that's where we'll start, Jake. The Wolverines come in as favorites over TCU, something they weren't. They were big underdogs against Georgia last year in the semifinals. How does that change things, even from a mindset standpoint?
Yeah, well, everything is a mindset at this point, Telly. It's it's playoffs time, right? It's you only win in advance. If you lose, you're out. And last year they were the severe underdogs to Georgia, a team that historically was probably one of the better college football teams that we've seen. So you go into those games with nothing to lose. Now you're the team that's favored, and your mindset has to change. Your preparation has to change. So you have to start to look to clues and say, hey, is Michigan fit to handle this? I would say they are. And I think Michigan fans that have followed this team this year, and anyone that's followed this team this year, you look at the way the teammates talk about each other, the way the coaches talk about one another, the way the team speaks of each other as a whole, and you say, okay, this is a very, very mature team. Ronnie Bell had a comment in the presser the other day. He's like, hey, man, we're not down here having any fun. No one on the team is talking about going out or doing anything. They're looking at this strictly as a business trip. And I'd go all the way back to the Ohio State game. Clearly a huge win. They turned the page almost immediately saying, hey, we got to go win a Big Ten championship now. Okay, they win the Big Ten championship. A reason to celebrate. Turn the page right away. So every sign that they've given us this year is understanding, hey, this team has their eyes set on a national title. They will not overlook TCU, and I expect them to be at their best.
It's pretty much a consensus, Jake, that TCU is probably the least dominant of the four semifinal teams in the college football playoff. And when you look at their season, Kansas State was able to beat them twice by simply just running the ball down their throat. So it should be simple for the Wolverines, right? They run the ball, they should win.
Well, it'll be simple because that's what they do. That's been their identity year round. And you bring up a great point, Telly. At this point throughout the season, we have a body of work. Teams have played double-digit games. So we can go back and say, all right, let's look at TCU's schedule. Who is most like Michigan? And Kansas State, they're not one for one, but their identity, similar to Michigan, is they want to run the ball. And they have quarterbacks that can run the ball as well, similar to Michigan. Well, TCU, the team that they've struggled with the most and their only loss on the season is against Kansas State. Earlier in the year, Kansas State was up 28-0 or 28-10 on TCU earlier in the season. So Michigan can look to that and say, hey, we have confidence because Michigan is the nation. They won the Joe Moore Award. They have the nation's best O-line. They have Donovan Edwards. They have a plethora of great tight ends. They believe that there's no one in the country that can run the ball the way that Michigan has this season. So going back and watching that tape should give Michigan confidence. But then again, man, I want to give respect to TCU because it seems all year people have been waiting for them to slip up and fall. And all they've done, aside from one game in their conference championship, is find ways to win. So this will be a great test for both teams. Over 4 quarters, I just think Michigan's too physical for TCU to come back and find a way to stop them.
And Jake, thanks for that correction. You're absolutely right. TCU only lost to Kansas State once and not twice. Let's move to the second semifinal game, Georgia versus Ohio State. We know Georgia is the defending champions. They're coming in big-time favorites. But when you look at this Ohio State team, they haven't played in nearly 5 weeks. And the last time they played, they were coming off a loss against Michigan. How do you feel like they will respond, and what type of Buckeyes team are you looking forward to seeing come Saturday?
Telly, I don't know how they will respond, but this is the fork in the road, and this is the opportunity they have at their hands. Some guys respond really well. Some guys, they get punched in the mouth, and that makes them go harder. They want to go out there and prove that, hey, that's not who we are. We're better than that, right? On the flip side, you have guys who get punched in the mouth and they throw in the towel. I don't expect Ohio State to throw in the towel, but the challenge for the Buckeyes is to elevate their game because Georgia, as good as they are the number 1 team in the country. They're not as good as they were last year. They are beatable. And Ohio State, when they're at their best, I mean, so many of the weeks this year, myself included, said the Buckeyes have a very strong case to be the number one team in the country. So if they want to beat Georgia, if they want to go on to win a national title, they have to be at their best. And at this point, to be at your best, it's all mental. They have the capability to do it, but can they do it consistently over 4 quarters?
Jake, appreciate your time. Safe travels out in Arizona. Enjoy the game.
Thanks, Telly. Good to see you.
All right, that's Jake Butt, and once again, he will be in Arizona for the Fiesta Bowl. 2022 was an eventful year in the Big Ten Conference. National championships, broken records, coaching changes for the first time in 3 decades. You see all of them right there. Plenty of storylines in the 2022 year. As we embark on 2023, I'm sure there are more to come. Notable storylines throughout the Big Ten Conference with so much turnover, so much success, national championships, and everything above. As I'm rejoined by Rafael Davis and Coach Dave Wanstead. And Coach and Rafael, 2022 was an eventful year in the Big Ten Conference, and we're trying to break down your top 3 headlines. And Rafael, we'll start with you. What are your top 3 in 2022?
Well, I'm going to say mine out of order because there's no way I could put Caitlin Clark as number 3 in what she was able to do this past season and this current season. Last year, you think about the record she was breaking, winning the Big Ten Tournament Championship. This year, she's back averaging 27, around 8 rebounds, 7 assists. They're winning again. Caitlin Clark is phenomenal.
All right. And what's your second one?
I would go 3 players from the Big Ten basketball being drafted in the top 10. You think about Keegan Murray, Jaden Ivey, Johnny Davis, outstanding seasons last season, being able to bring that type of notoriety to the Big Ten when it was thought of just as a big man school. And then you have 3 guards and wing. You throw Malachi Brennan in there in that top 15. Bringing that type of notoriety to the Big Ten was fun to see.
And number 1, what's your biggest story out of 2022?
Purdue University was number 1 team in the land. 2 seasons in a row. They said they couldn't do it. They said it would be a down year after Jaden Ivey gets drafted, Travion Williams leave. But they're back number 1. First time it's happened in the Big Ten since the mid-'70s where you had 2 teams go back-to-back seasons being number 1. Purdue, this is your season to go and make some special things happen. Zach Edey is Player of the Year front runner. It's exciting to see.
All right, Coach, we look back. We're almost in 2023. When you look back at 2022, your top 3 headlines.
Well, the first one jumps at me is the Big Ten is running back you, okay? You know, from the standpoint of you look at the top running backs around the country and all on winning teams, you're talking about Michigan with Corm, you're talking about Minnesota, Ibrahim, you're talking about Chase Brown at Illinois. We saw Breland Allen last night. He was the player of the game for Wisconsin, ran for 100 and some yards last night. So the running backs and their production in the Big Ten Conference would be one of mine.
All right, number 2?
Number 2 would be Michigan is the team to beat now in the Big Ten football. When you look at what Jim Harbaugh and this football team went through from the beginning, let's go back to last year when he was interviewing for the Vikings job the day before signing date. How does he overcome that? The guy's amazing. And then he loses his offensive coordinator, his defensive coordinator. He makes a quarterback change. And here he sits, right in the college football playoff system. Michigan is the team in the Big Ten right now.
Wow. And your number 1 storyline from 2022?
I have a tough time with this one. I'll tell you, Telly, the landscape in college football has changed dramatically over the last few years, and I hope it's not here to stay. And by that I mean with this, and I'm talking to college coaches all the time, with the NIL, with these players being promised and leaving and coaches going in and grabbing them from other teams, from this transfer portal where kids are transferring 3, 4, 5 different schools. You look at the opting out of bowl games. They got to make the redshirt freshmen eligible to play because so many players. Pitt, was talking to coach, they got 9 players that opted out of the bowl game this year. So, all these things, and I get the reasons for them, I do, but somehow we got to lasso and tighten these things up and make it a little bit more controllable.
Well, I won't have time to get to all 3 of mine, but I think my biggest takeaway would be the coaching turnover just in the Big Ten West Division in this year. You got Wisconsin, Purdue, and Nebraska all starting new eras with new head coaches. So a lot to look forward to in 2023 and a lot to look forward to the rest of this Big Ten bowl season.